The autumn of 1988 came early to Clearwater, Washington, cold, gray, and silent. On the morning of October 4th, a fisherman named Harold Kemp was trolling the north end of Lake Ironwood when his net snagged on something heavy. At first, he thought it was driftwood. When he pulled it closer, the shape beneath the surface gleamed faintly like metal. It wasn't driftwood. It was a car. When divers raised the vehicle that afternoon, the crowd that had gathered on the shore gasped. Inside the rusted blue 1980 Toyota Corolla was a woman's skeleton, seatbelt still buckled, wedding ring still on her hand. Her ID was gone, but her purse, waterlogged yet intact, contained a photograph of a smiling man and two children, along with a church bulletin dated September 1988. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, "See you at the cabin, D." The police quickly identified her as Deborah Lynn Haynes, a 34-year-old schoolteacher who'd gone missing exactly 1 week earlier after leaving a PTA meeting. Her husband, Douglas Haynes, reported her missing that night, claiming she'd never come home. Now she had come back, and she'd brought questions no one was ready to answer. Detective Elena Brooks, one of Clearwater's few female investigators at the time, took the case. She was known for her composure and relentlessness, traits that didn't make her popular in a small-town department dominated by men who'd rather close cases than solve them. The first strange thing she noticed was the car's gear shift, neutral. The keys were still in the ignition, but the car's headlights had been deliberately switched off. Someone didn't want the car seen going into the lake, she told her partner, Detective Frank Holloway. A mechanical inspection confirmed the accelerator cable had been cut. The car hadn't rolled in accidentally. It had been pushed. Hands full collapse, the kind of performance Brooks had seen before. "She was supposed to meet me at the cabin," he said. "We were trying to fix things. You have to believe me." But Brooks didn't. Within days, investigators learned that Deborah had filed for separation 2 months before her disappearance. Friends told police she'd discovered Douglas was having an affair with a younger woman from their church choir. She'd been saving money to leave him. On September 27th, Deborah told a friend she was going to meet Douglas one last time at the family's lakeside cabin near Ironwood to get closure. She never returned. The cabin was searched the next week. Inside, everything appeared neat. Too neat. The bed was made, the dishes washed, the floors recently scrubbed. But when Brooks pulled open the fireplace grate, she found charred fragments of paper, pieces of a note, and something metallic fused into the ash. The lab later identified the object as a small brass key, the type used for diary locks. Douglas denied everything. "We argued, yes, but I loved her," he said. "She must have driven off the road by mistake." But his alibi didn't hold. He claimed he was at home with their kids that night, yet phone records showed he'd made 2 calls from a payphone near the lake around midnight. Still, no physical evidence tied him directly to the crime. Without witnesses or DNA, the case stalled. The local DA declined to file charges. By Christmas 1988, Deborah's death was officially ruled an accident. Her car was towed, her remains buried, and her husband moved away the following spring. Detective Brooks never believed the ruling. She kept a copy of the crime scene photo pinned above her desk for the rest of her career. "That lake," she used to say, "doesn't keep secrets forever." It took 34 years for her to be right. In 2022, Washington State launched its Cold Water Evidence Initiative, a forensic program aimed at digitally reconstructing submerged crime scenes using preserved corrosion data. Lake Ironwood was one of the pilot sites. During the cleanup, divers retrieved an old police evidence container from the original salvage operation, a small box containing items thought lost decades earlier. Inside were Deborah's keys, a corroded house key, and a single earring that didn't match what she'd been wearing when found. The back of the earring was engraved with the initials JW. Detective Brooks had passed away in 2019, but her protege, Detective Aria Moore, reopened the case in her honor. The initials led Moore to recheck the original interview notes, and there it was. The name appeared once, buried in a 1988 witness statement. Jenna Wallace, age 23, Douglas Haynes' brother, former mistress. She'd left Clearwater in 1990, remarried, changed her name, and vanished from public life. Moore tracked her to Oregon and requested a meeting. At first, Wallace refused to talk. That was another lifetime, she said. But when shown a photo of the recovered earring, she went silent, then whispered, "He said he threw that in the lake." Wallace admitted she'd been with Douglas the night Deborah disappeared. "He told me he was ending things cleanly, said they just needed closure." She paused. When he came back, his clothes were wet. She never reported it because, in her words, "He made me believe it was my fault, that if I said anything, it would ruin the church, the kids, everything." Detective Moore asked where he was now. Wallace hesitated, then said he lives in Idaho, still preaching. When Idaho State Police served the warrant on Douglas Haynes in 2023, he was 71, frail, still wearing a wedding band. At first, he claimed he had nothing to say. Then, after being shown a photo of the necklace found in Deborah's purse, he whispered, "You found it, didn't you? The lake gave it back." He confessed that night. According to the taped interview, Douglas and Deborah met at the cabin as planned. She wanted him to sign divorce papers. He refused. She told him she was taking the kids. In his words, she wouldn't stop talking about freedom, about forgiveness, about leaving me. He grabbed her by the throat. When she stopped struggling, he panicked. He said he didn't mean to kill her, but he couldn't call for help, not as a respected deacon. He placed her in the passenger seat of her car, buckled her seatbelt, and pushed the vehicle into the lake. Before he left, he dropped her purse in the passenger seat and her wedding photo on the dashboard. Then, he stood on the dock and prayed. When asked about the note in her purse, "See you at the cabin, D," he claimed it was hers, written to remind herself of the meeting. But handwriting analysis proved it wasn't. It was his. The confession stunned investigators, not because it existed, but because of what followed. "I went back to the lake every year," he said. "I prayed for her to forgive me. I think she finally did." The case of Deborah Haynes closed officially in 2023, 35 years after she disappeared beneath Lake Ironwood. But when divers returned to the site for a final sweep, they discovered something else: an old Bible wedged between the rocks at the base of the dock. Inside, a passage was underlined in red: "And the waters shall uncover what was hidden, and the earth shall no longer hide her slain." It was open to Isaiah 26:21. Sometimes the lake doesn't bury secrets. It keeps them, waiting. By the time Douglas Haynes stood trial in early 2024, the quiet town of Clearwater had become a media circus. Every national outlet wanted footage of the Lake Ironwood killer, the man who'd hidden a murder beneath faith and water for 35 years. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, whispering about how someone could carry a secret like that for so long and still preach forgiveness every Sunday. Inside the courtroom, the once gentle deacon looked almost harmless, thin, gray-haired, trembling hands folded on the table. But when he spoke, that soft, measured voice returned, and for a moment, the whole room could hear the man he used to be. "It was a mistake," he said. "She fell, and I panicked. I asked God to forgive me every day since." Detective Aria Moore sat 3 rows behind the prosecution, watching him lie as smoothly as if he were giving a sermon. The state had no physical witnesses to the murder, only the confession, the earring, and the diary fragments recovered from the fireplace. But those fragments turned out to be more damning than anyone expected. The lab's thermal reconstruction had revealed one half-burned line written in Deborah's handwriting. "He said the lake would keep the truth quiet." That line alone shifted the entire tone of the trial. The prosecutor played the recovered interview tape, letting the jury hear Haynes' own voice admitting to pushing the car off the dock. When they played the part where he said she wouldn't stop talking about freedom, several jurors visibly flinched. For Detective Moore, that moment felt like vindication, not just for Deborah, but for her mentor, Detective Brooks, who had fought for decades to keep the case open. But what came next chilled everyone. When the defense began cross-examination, Haynes' attorney argued that his confession was coerced, the result of spiritual guilt and age-related confusion. The defense introduced dozens of character letters from former parishioners describing Haynes as gentle, compassionate, devoted. In his closing statement, the defense attorney said, "If every sinner who prayed for forgiveness were punished by men, there would be no room left in heaven." The courtroom fell silent. Then the prosecutor stood and replied, "If every murderer hid behind forgiveness, there would be no room left for justice." The verdict came after 6 hours of deliberation. Guilty of second-degree murder. Haynes didn't react. He simply bowed his head, muttered something under his breath, and asked the judge for one request before sentencing. "May I say a prayer for her?" The judge allowed it. The entire courtroom stood still as Haynes whispered, "Deborah, the water kept you, but God never did. Forgive." Then he looked at Detective Moore and said softly, "Tell her she can rest now." It sent a shiver through her. 2 days later, while preparing evidence for the state archive, Moore revisited the Ironwood cabin one last time. The structure was collapsing, the wood swollen and soft from years of rain. She wanted to close the circle, to see the place where it all happened. As she stepped inside, she noticed something strange on the floorboards. A square section that sounded hollow when tapped. She pried it open and found a small sealed tin box wrapped in waterproof cloth. Inside was a faded Polaroid, a silver key, and a handwritten letter addressed to whoever finds this. The note read, "If he ever admits what he did, it means the lake forgave him, but I never will." It was signed, Deborah. The timestamp on the back of the photo showed September 27th, 1988, the day she disappeared. In the picture, she was standing by the lake, smiling faintly, the same blue car visible in the background. It wasn't just a keepsake. It was evidence that Deborah had known something was coming. Moore turned the key over in her hand and realized it matched the one burned in the fireplace. The diary key. Deborah must have hidden this box as a backup, a safeguard in case she never returned. Forensics later revealed microscopic prints on the letter from another person, not Douglas. They belonged to Jenna Wallace, the former mistress. It suggested something deeper. Jenna had read the letter before it was hidden. When Moore confronted her again, Jenna broke down completely. She admitted she'd known about the note, that Deborah had shown it to her during a confrontation 2 days before the murder. "She told me she wasn't afraid of him anymore," Jenna said through tears. "She said she'd written everything down. I told her to burn it. I thought I was protecting her." The guilt had eaten at Jenna for 35 years. She'd never told anyone. Moore recorded the statement and included it in the final file, the last piece of the puzzle Detective Brooks had started. At the sentencing hearing, the courtroom was packed once again. Haynes, now a frail shadow of himself, sat shackled in a wheelchair. When asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, he lifted his head and said, "I've already been living in hell." Judge Wallace replied evenly, "Then you'll feel at home where you're going. Life in prison, no parole." The day after the verdict, Moore returned to Lake Ironwood. The water was calm, glass-like, reflecting the mountains perfectly. The autumn wind carried the faint scent of pine and cold metal, the same smell the divers described in their reports. She tossed a single daisy into the water, the same flower her mentor, Brooks, had left on countless cases. The petals drifted for a moment, then sank. "You left your truth in the lake," she whispered, "and it found its way home." A week later, the forensic unit cleaning the recovered Bible from the lake noticed something unusual. A folded scrap of paper pressed between the pages, too fragile to separate earlier. Once dried and scanned, the writing became legible. "If they find this, tell them I'm not afraid." He said the lake would forgive him, but I know better. The water remembers. It was signed D.H. The handwriting matched Deborah's perfectly. When Detective Moore read it, she smiled faintly. "You were right, Detective Brooks. The lake didn't hide the truth. It just waited." Months later, the Washington State Senate passed the Haynes Victims Preservation Act, mandating that submerged evidence in cold cases must never be discarded. The bill was dedicated to Detective Elena Brooks and the woman who refused to stay silent beneath the water. Lake Ironwood became a state memorial site. Visitors left flowers and handwritten notes at the pier, many with the same phrase written across them: "The water remembers." At her desk one evening, Detective Moore opened the final report for the Washington State Cold Case Unit and typed her closing statement. Justice in this case was never about punishment. It was about recovery, of truth, of memory, of faith in what the dead can still teach us. She closed the file and glanced at the photo of Brooks on her wall. Outside, the rain had started again, whispering softly against the glass, the sound of a lake remembering. 37 years after the disappearance of Deborah Haynes, Lake Ironwood remained a quiet mirror of memory. Locals no longer called it cursed. They called it honest. It had given back everything the town once tried to bury: a car, a body, a Bible, and a confession that tore through generations of silence. By 2025, Detective Aria Moore had been promoted to head of Washington's Cold Case Division. The Ironwood case had become required training material for new recruits, a symbol of how persistence and technology could bring the dead back into conversation with the living. But the lake wasn't done speaking. That spring, environmental divers conducting sonar sweeps for a conservation project picked up something metallic lodged deep beneath the dock where Deborah's car had entered the water. When they raised it, everyone froze. It wasn't debris or scrap metal. It was another car, a black 1987 Ford Taurus, license plates long corroded, windows sealed shut with mud and silt. The divers noted the same eerie detail the fishermen had reported decades earlier. The headlights had been intentionally turned off. Moore was called immediately. Her gut twisted the moment she saw the vehicle. The Ironwood case file had mentioned whispers of another woman who vanished in late 1987. Linda Corditt, age 29, last seen leaving Clearwater on her way to meet a friend by the lake. Her case had been labeled unrelated. Now, that theory collapsed. When the car was lifted from the water, the forensic team found a purse in the passenger seat and inside it, a damp photograph of Deborah and Linda together, smiling in front of a school classroom. They'd worked at the same elementary school. Pinned to the visor with a rusted paperclip was a note. Its ink faded, but still legible. He said she forgave him, but I don't think he ever did. Moore read it 3 times, her throat tightening. DNA from the remains confirmed it. Linda Corbitt, missing since December 1987. The find changed everything about the case. The timeline of Haynes' violence stretched further than anyone believed. For years, investigators assumed Deborah was the only victim. Now, it appeared Douglas had silenced the one person who could expose him, his wife's closest friend. When the evidence was presented to him in prison, Haynes initially refused to respond. But after a long pause, he began to laugh, a hollow, breathless sound that unsettled the guards in the room. "She was supposed to stay quiet too," he said. "The lake was supposed to keep them both." Moore leaned forward across the table. "You didn't just kill your wife, Douglas. You killed her best friend to protect your image." He looked up at her and said quietly, "No, detective, I killed the Echo." For Moore, that was the last time she would ever speak to him. Haynes died in prison 3 months later, his final words to the chaplain reportedly being, "The lake will forgive me again." But even death couldn't close the case. When Moore reviewed his property after his passing, she found a sealed envelope addressed to her by name. Inside was a single photo, the same image of Deborah and Linda, now dried and cleaned, and on the back, written in Haynes' handwriting, "You found what she wanted you to find, but there's something else still waiting." 2 weeks later, the forensic dive team returned to Lake Ironwood to continue recovery. Moore insisted on being there. On the final dive of the day, one of the divers surfaced holding a sealed metal canister. Inside was a cassette tape, miraculously preserved inside a waterproof pouch. The date written on the label, October 5th, 1988, one day after discovery. The handwriting matched Detective Elena Brooks. When the tape was played back at the lab, Brooks's voice echoed through static. "If this tape is found, I want whoever's listening to know something. The day they pulled Deborah's car from the water, I saw 2 sets of tire tracks leading into the lake, not one. We covered the second set by mistake when we moved the crane. I think he came back." Her voice trembled slightly before she continued. "If I'm right, then there's another story buried here. Don't stop looking." Moore sat in stunned silence. Her mentor had seen the truth even then. She'd just never been believed. That night, Moore visited the lake alone. The moon reflected off the still surface like a sheet of silver glass. She placed a lantern on the pier and let it drift out over the water. "You were right, Elena," she whispered. "You always were." For a moment, she thought she saw the faint shimmer of 2 shapes beneath the surface. Not shadows, but outlines of vehicles. The light rippled, and they disappeared. The next morning, Moore met with the governor to finalize the expansion of the Haynes Victims Preservation Act, now renamed the Ironwood Initiative, ensuring every submerged cold case in Washington would receive automatic digital preservation. At the ceremony, she was asked what the case had taught her most. She paused before answering that justice doesn't rise to the surface all at once. It comes up piece by piece, every time someone refuses to stop searching. Months later, on a quiet November evening, Moore visited the Clearwater Historical Museum, where Deborah and Linda's recovered belongings were displayed. At the end of the exhibit stood a plaque engraved with Deborah's final words from the letter found in her Bible. "The water remembers." Moore placed a daisy beneath it and whispered, "Now everyone does." The final archival entry in the Washington Cold Case Division for the Ironwood investigation reads, "Case status fully resolved. 2 victims, 1 confession, 1 lake that refused to stay silent. Primary investigator, Detective Elena Brooks, deceased. Reopened by Detective Aria Moore. Final entry by State of Washington Cold Case Division, 2025. Summary: justice recovered. As Moore locked the file and turned off the lights, thunder rolled faintly outside, and rain began to fall against the windows, the same soft rhythm that had marked every breakthrough in the case. The camera of memory would have lingered on her silhouette beside the glass, the faint reflection of rippling water superimposed over her face. Because in Clearwater, the rain doesn't just fall, it reminds. And under the black surface of Lake Ironwood, 2 stories, bound by guilt, love, and silence, finally rested side by side.